In the heart of the frozen wilds, where the moon wept silver tears upon the snow, a single flame dared to defy the endless night. Brenna Holt stumbled through the blizzard's embrace, her breath a ragged ghost in the howling wind. The rejection still burned hotter than any hearth she had ever known. Cast out from the pack like spoiled meat, her scent deemed unworthy, her blood too thin for the Alpha's lineage. No mate claimed her, no kin mourned her exile. She was Omega without anchor, a shadow wandering the jagged peaks of the Silverfang Mountains. The cold clawed at her threadbare cloak, seeping into bones that ached with the weight of isolation. Yet it was nothing compared to the fire in her chest, the unquenchable ember of survival that refused to gut her out. The forest loomed like ancient sentinels, pines bowed under cloaks of ice, their branches whispering secrets to the storm. Brenna's bare feet, boots long stolen by opportunistic rogues, sank into the drifts, each step a testament to her defiance. She had been left for the wolves, quite literally, after the pack's beta discovered her wandering too close to their borders during the last full moon. "Unmarked and unblessed," they had snarled, their eyes gleaming with the cruelty of those who feared the weak might expose their own fractures. Banished at dawn, she fled into the white void, hunger gnawing at her flanks like a predator's teeth. Night fell swiftly in these heights, the moon rising bloated and indifferent, casting a pallid glow over the undulating snowfields. Brenna paused at the edge of a ravine, her enhanced senses, those subtle gifts of her Omega nature, pricking at the air. Beneath the gale's fury, she caught it, the acrid tang of smoke, sharp against the crisp purity of winter. Her heart stuttered. Fire in this frozen hell? It was no natural blaze. The wind carried the foul undercurrent of accelerant, oil and malice mingled like a traitor's brew. She crested a ridge, the world tilting into chaos below. A den, once a humble burrow nestled in the roots of an ancient oak, now roared with infernal hunger. Flames licked at the snow-mantled earth, devouring the thatch and timber with greedy snaps, sending plumes of black smoke spiraling toward the indifferent stars. Weavos pierced the night, not the triumphant calls of hunters, but the desperate yips of the trapped. Pups. The scent hit her then, young and terrified, laced with the metallic bite of fear sweat. Brenna's body moved before her mind could protest. The pack had forsaken her, but the wilds demanded no such allegiances. Survival wove its threads through all, binding the outcast to the innocent. She scrambled down the slope, the snow giving way in treacherous slides, her hands raw against the frozen scrub. Heat blasted her face as she neared, the fire's maw gaping wide, orange tongues flickering like the eyes of demons from forgotten lore. The den's entrance had collapsed under a fallen branch, now a cage of smoldering wood and stone. A whimper escaped from within, faint but insistent, pulling at the frayed edges of her soul. Brenna dropped to her knees, ignoring the sear of embers against her palms. "Hold on," she murmured, voice lost to the crackle and roar. Dirt and ash caked her fingers as she clawed at the debris, nails splintering, blood welling warm in the cold. The first pup tumbled out, a scruffy gray bundle no larger than her forearm, coughing and trembling. Its fur singed at the edges, eyes wide with the bewilderment of one too young to comprehend betrayal. She scooped it close, pressing it to her chest where her heartbeat thrummed a lullaby of rescue. But there were more cries, deeper in the inferno's throat. Smoke stung her eyes, tears carving clean paths down soot-streaked cheeks. The flames hungered, fed by some arsonist's spite, perhaps a rival pack's sabotage, or the grudge of a scorned elder. Whispers of war had rippled through the valleys before her exile. Territories contested under the guise of the Deuce's will. Alphas plotting in shadowed councils while the vulnerable paid the pyre's toll. Brenna plunged her arm into the heat, the pain a white-hot vice that blurred her vision. Her skin blistered, but she grasped fur, soft, yielding, and hauled out the second pup, this one tawny and limp, smoke inhalation dulling its gaze. She laid it beside the first, her own breaths coming in gasps, the world narrowing to the rhythm of extraction. The fire's roar mocked her, a symphony of destruction under the moon's silent vigil. What was this place? Not a wild den, she realized with a chill that pierced deeper than the wind. A hidden nursery, perhaps, for the elite's young, tucked away from prying eyes amid the border skirmishes. The third cry was the weakest, a threadbare plea that twisted something primal within her. Brenna tore at the blockage with renewed fury, her blood mingling with the ash, staining the snow in crimson flecks that steamed on the frost. The beam splintered under her assault, and she reached into the heart of the blaze. Agony lanced through her, but her fingers closed around a small, warm form. She pulled, muscles screaming, and the pup emerged, black as midnight, with a noble cast to its tiny snout, unmarked by the flames that should have claimed it. As the den collapsed in a final, thunderous exhale, sending sparks dancing like fallen stars, Brenna collapsed beside her charges. The pups nuzzled against her, their warmth a fragile bulwark against the encroaching cold. The moon watched, its light pooling on the third pup's fur, revealing a faint silvery mark at its throat, a royal sigil, etched by birthright. Heir. The word echoed in her mind, unbidden, as distant howls answered the night's violence. She had pulled life from the jaws of death, but in doing so, she had ignited a chain that would bind her to thrones and shadows she never sought. The wind howled its approval, carrying the scent of blood and rebirth, while the fire's embers glowed like eyes in the dark. Brenna cradled the pups against her chest, their tiny forms heaving with exhausted breaths that mirrored her own. The fire's remnants hissed and popped, a dying heartbeat in the snow-swept clearing, casting erratic shadows that danced like specters across the ravaged earth. The third pup, the one with the silvery sigil etched into its midnight fur, nuzzled closest, its warmth seeping through her torn cloak like a forbidden promise. She traced the mark with a trembling finger, the cool metal of an old, inherited pendant at her throat, her mother's lone heirloom, a crescent moon cradling a flame, brushing against her skin. It had survived her exile, just as she had, but now it felt heavier, as if the moon itself weighed her choices. The night deepened, the blizzard's fury ebbing into a mournful wind that carried distant echoes, weavos, sharp and urgent, slicing through the pines like blades. Brenna's senses sharpened, the omega in her attuned to threats unseen. She gathered the pups tighter, her blistered hands protesting with fresh stabs of pain, and scanned the tree line. The air thickened with the scent of blood, not her own, but something wilder, laced with the musk of alpha dominance and the tang of fresh wounds. Footsteps crunched in the snow, deliberate yet faltering, approaching from the shadows where the flames had begun their treacherous work. He emerged like a figure forged from the storm itself, tall, broad-shouldered, his fur-lined cloak torn and singed, revealing glimpses of armored leather beneath. Rowan Ashcliffe, Alpha King of the Silverfang realm, though she did not yet know his name. His face was a map of exhaustion, etched lines framing eyes the color of storm-tossed seas, shadowed by the weight of a crown he wore invisibly. Blood streaked his jaw from a gash above his brow, and he limped, favoring a leg that bore the mark of a recent skirmish, perhaps the same arson that had claimed the den. The wind whipped his dark hair, matted with ash, and in his gaze burned a feral intensity, tempered by something deeper. Guilt, raw and unyielding, like the embers refusing to die. He froze at the sight of her, nostrils flaring as he inhaled her scent, smoke and blood and the faint, resilient wildflower note of an unmarked omega. The pup stirred, the third one letting out a soft whine that pierced the silence. Rowan's eyes locked on it, widening with a recognition that shattered his composure. He staggered forward, breath ragged, the snow crunching under his boots like brittle bones. "You," he rasped, voice gravel-rough from smoke and unspoken burdens. "What have you done?" Fear coiled in Brenna's gut, instinctive and electric, pulling her back against the oak's charred roots. This was no rogue wanderer. His presence radiated authority, the air humming with the subtle command of royalty. She clutched the pups closer, her heart thundering a warning rhythm. The pendant at her throat warmed inexplicably, as if echoing the fire's memory. "I saved them," she whispered, her voice steady despite the tremor in her limbs. "From the flames, from whatever hell sent them." He dropped to one knee before her, close enough that she could smell the iron of his blood mingling with pine and leather. His hand reached out, hesitating inches from the third pup, fingers scarred from battles long past. The sigil gleamed under the moon's gaze, undeniable, a royal brand. The mark of his lineage, the heir he had thought lost to the rival pack's treachery. Rowan's breath hitched, a sound like breaking ice, and for a moment the king was merely a father, stripped bare. "Elias," he murmured, the name a prayer on his lips, as he gently lifted the pup into his arms. The others mewled in protest, but Brenna released them reluctantly, her body aching from the effort of holding on. Curiosity warred with her caution as she studied him. There was no immediate claim, no barked orders to surrender the young. Instead, a quiet reverence in his touch, his eyes flicking to her with a mix of gratitude and wariness. The connection sparked unbidden, an Omega's intuition sensing the fractures in his soul, the guilt that shadowed his every movement like a curse. He had failed them, she realized, the arson no accident but a strike against his bloodline, born of the wars he had waged for power. Yet here he was, wounded and alone, fleeing the assassins who had torched the hidden nursery to sever his legacy. "Why risk it?" he asked, his voice low, probing, as if testing the air between them. The wind tugged at his cloak, revealing a tattoo on his collarbone, a crescent flame, twin to her pendant's design, faded but fierce. "An outcast like you. The pack's whisper of wanderers who prey on the weak in these woods." Brenna's chin lifted, defiance flickering through her fear. "And kings who let their young burn while they chase thrones?" The words escaped before she could cage them. Born of her own scars, the rejection that had left her hollow, the pack's scorn a mirror to his evident remorse. She met his gaze, the blue depths pulling at her like the tide, instinctive yet resisted. He was danger incarnate, a force that could crush her fragile freedom, yet something in his melancholy stirred an unwelcome empathy, a curiosity that bloomed amid the ashes. Rowan did not strike, did not command. Instead, he rose slowly, the pups cradled against him, his limp more pronounced in the cold. "The fire was no accident," he said, glancing toward the darkening horizon where Weavos grew nearer, a chorus of pursuit. "Traitors in my own council, they thought the heir dead." His eyes returned to her, lingering, as if seeing beyond the soot to the strength that had defied the blaze. "Come with me. The night hunts us all now." She hesitated, the pendant burning against her skin, a symbol of fates entwined. Fear whispered retreat, but curiosity, and that denied pull, urged her forward into the unknown. The moon hung low, witnessing their fragile truce as the wind carried the promise of refuge amid the storm. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments of the night they find you. Brenna followed Rowan through the labyrinth of snow-choked pines. The pups bundled against his chest like fragile talismans, warding off the encroaching dark. The wind clawed at her back, relentless and unforgiving, carrying the distant clamor of pursuit. Weavos that twisted into snarls, the thud of paws against frozen earth. Her feet bled into the snow, each step a numb echo of the fire's lingering burn, but she pressed on, driven by the fragile thread of alliance woven in the ashes. The pendant at her throat swung like a pendulum, its crescent moon and cradled flame catching slivers of moonlight, a silent witness to the improbable path she tread. Rowan's limp slowed them, his broad frame cutting a path through drifts that swallowed lesser travelers whole. He glanced back often, his storm-sea eyes scanning her form with a mix of assessment and something softer, unnameable, a flicker of reliance that both unnerved and anchored her. Elias, the third pup, rode in the crook of his arm, its tiny chest rising and falling in rhythm with the king's labored breaths. The other two huddled against him, their warmth a shared defiance against the cold that seeped into her marrow. She had saved them from flames, but now the night itself conspired to claim what the fire had spared. They descended into a narrow gorge, the walls rising like the jagged teeth of some ancient beast, veined with ice that gleamed blue under the moon's pale scrutiny. The air grew thicker here, heavy with the scent of damp stone and forgotten streams burbling beneath the frost. Rowan veered toward a shadowed crevice, half obscured by overhanging ledges heavy with snow. "In here," he murmured, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the chill. "The caverns run deep, old smuggling trails from the border wars. They'll mask our scent, if the winds hold." Brenna hesitated at the threshold, the darkness yawning like an open wound. Caves were lairs for the desperate, echoes of her own exile where isolation had been both shield and cage. But the Weavos swelled closer, a pack's fury honed by betrayal, and she slipped inside after him. The air shifted immediately, warmer, laced with the mineral tang of underground rivers and the faint, earthy musk of moss clinging to unseen walls. Rowan kindled a small fire with flint from his pouch, the flames licking at twisted roots that protruded from the stone like petrified veins. Light bloomed, casting their shadows long and wavering, the pendant at her neck pulsing with reflected warmth. He settled the pups near the fire, their eyes blinking open to the safety of flickering gold. Elias nosed at his father's hand, eliciting a rare ghost of a smile from Rowan, a crack in the king's armored facade. Brenna sank to the ground opposite, her blistered palms stinging as she extended them toward the heat. The silence stretched, broken only by the pup's contented sighs and the distant drip of water echoing like hesitant heartbeats. She watched him tend to his wounds, tearing a strip from his cloak to bind the gash on his leg, blood seeping dark against the fabric. Guilt shadowed his movements, heavy as the crown he did not wear. She sensed it in the tension of his shoulders, the way his gaze avoided the heir's innocent form. "Why this place?" she asked finally, her voice threading through the quiet like smoke. Curiosity had rooted in her during their flight, blooming despite the fear that still coiled in her belly. "A king hiding in rat holes? Your realm must be vast, your armies loyal." Rowan's hands stilled, the firelight carving hollows beneath his eyes. He met her stare, the blue depths roiling with tempests unspoken. "Loyalty is a blade that cuts both ways, Omega. My counsel, those I trusted with the nursery's guard, turned for a rival alpha's promise of land and power. The fire was their message. Sever the Ashcliff line, end my reign before it hardens further." He glanced at Elias, his voice cracking like thin ice. "I was away, brokering peace in the lowlands, blind to the serpents at my hearth. Guilt is my chain now, heavier than any throne." Empathy stirred unbidden in Brenna's chest, a warmth that rivaled the fire's glow. She knew exile's bite, the sting of being deemed unworthy, discarded like chaff in the wind. Yet here he sat, not commanding fealty, but sharing the raw edge of his failure, his vulnerability, a bridge across the chasm of their worlds. "And me?" she pressed, tracing the pendant's curve with a scarred finger. It had warmed again during their escape, as if the flame within recognized its twin on his skin, the faded tattoo peeking from his collar, a mark of shared lineage she could not yet fathom. "You ask a wanderer to guard your secrets. What if I run? Take the pups and vanish into the wilds." He leaned forward, the fire painting his face in crimson and shadow. "You could have. At the den, you chose life over flight. That's no rogue's heart." His words hung between them, instinctive pull denied by reason, yet undeniable in the cavern's intimacy. The pups stirred, one tumbling toward her, its tawny fur brushing her knee. She gathered it close, the simple act weaving threads of care into the air, transforming stranger into ally. The refuge shattered with a sudden snarl from the entrance. Scouts, two lithe betas with eyes gleaming like polished steel, their scents reeking of oil and ambition. They lunged, claws extended, the cavern erupting into chaos. Rowan surged to his feet, a guttural roar escaping his throat as he intercepted the first, his body a wall of muscle and fury. Fists met fur, blood spraying in arcs that sizzled on the hot stones. Brenna scrambled back, shielding the pups, her Omega instincts flaring, not to flee, but to fight. She seized a jagged root from the fire's edge, its end glowing red, and swung it at the second assailant as it darted past. The beta yelped, fur singed but pressed on, jaws snapping toward Elias. Brenna's world narrowed to that threat, fear transmuting into fierce resolve. She drove the burning root forward, the flames biting deep into the attacker's flank, eliciting a howl that reverberated off the walls. Rowan dispatched his foe with a brutal twist, neck snapping like dry twigs, and turned to aid her. Together, they felled the second, breaths mingling in the aftermath, the cavern thick with the coppery reek of blood and the acrid bite of scorched flesh. He slumped against the wall, chest heaving, a fresh gash weeping across his ribs. Brenna knelt beside him, tearing her own cloak to staunch the flow, her touch tentative yet steady. Their eyes met in the fire's dying light, gratitude forging something deeper, an empathy born of shared peril, a bond etched in the heat of defense. The pendant burned against her skin, flame and moon entwined, mirroring the quiet shift within her, from outcast to guardian, from fear to fragile trust. Outside, the wind mourned the fallen, weavos fading into the night, but the refuge held, for now. In the silence that followed, Rowan covered her hand with his, rough and warm. "You fight like one marked by the Deusa," he whispered, the words a confession, pulling her inexorably into his shadowed world. What was strength, if not choosing to stand amid the ruins, mercy's flame kindled against the dark? The cavern's embers had faded to a sullen glow, casting elongated shadows that clung to the walls like unspoken regrets. Brenna sat vigil by the fire's remnants, the pups curled in a drowsy heap at her side, their breaths a soft counterpoint to the underground river's murmur. Elias, the heir with the silvery sigil, pressed against her thigh, his warmth a quiet anchor amid the chill that seeped from the stone. Her hands, still raw from the fray, traced the pendant at her throat, the crescent moon cradling its eternal flame, now cool against her skin, but humming with an undercurrent she could no longer ignore. It had warmed during the fight, pulsing in rhythm with her blood, as if awakening to the violence that bound them. Rowan leaned against the opposite wall, his wounds bound, but his gaze distant, fixed on the flickering light, as if it held answers to the betrayals that haunted him. The fresh gash across his ribs wept shadows of crimson, staining the makeshift bandage, and in the quiet aftermath, his guilt surfaced like frost on a window pane, raw, unyielding. He had spoken of the Deusa's mark, but his words lingered in the air between them, heavy with the weight of what he dared not voice. Brenna felt it too, that instinctive pull, resisted yet insistent, weaving through her like threads of moonlight through storm clouds. She was no seer, no priestess of the lunar temples. She was exile, Omega without claim. Yet the pendant, her mother's silent legacy, seemed to whisper otherwise. Its flame etched deeper into her thoughts with every heartbeat. The air shifted, thick with the scent of blood and damp earth, as a low tremor rippled through the cavern floor. Not the river's flow, but something primal, stirring from the depths. Brenna's vision blurred at the edges, the fire's glow expanding into a haze of silver and gold. Her breath caught, sharp and involuntary, as memories not her own flooded in. Flashes of a hidden nursery under siege, flames birthed from shadowed hands, the council's traitorous whispers echoing like wind through pines. She saw Rowan as a younger king, crowned in the great hall of ice-veined stone, his tattoo fresh and fierce, vowing oaths to the Dusa under a full moon's gaze, but beneath it all, a fracture, a prophecy unspoken, of an heir lost and a redeemer unmarked, bound by fire and blood. She gasped, clutching the pendant, its metal searing hot now, as if the flame within had ignited her veins. The pups stirred, Elias lifting his head with a whine that pierced the haze, his eyes locking onto hers with unnatural clarity. In that moment, the cavern walls seemed to dissolve, revealing paths unseen. Twisting tunnels veined with glowing quartz, leading northward to forgotten sanctuaries where the Silverfang's true heart lay buried. A gift, long dormant, unfurled within her. The Pathfinder's sight, a rare Omega endowment, whispered in ancient lore as the Deuce's compass for the lost. It had slumbered through her exile, masked by rejection's numb veil. But the fire's trial and the heir's near death had called it forth, like a seed cracking under winter's thaw. Rowan surged forward, his hand gripping her shoulder, steadying her as the vision receded in waves of vertigo. His touch grounded her, the calluses of his palm rough against her skin, carrying the scent of pine and iron, alpha strength tempered by sorrow. "What did you see?" he demanded, voice low and urgent, his storm sea eyes searching hers with the intensity that stripped away pretenses. The bond between them sharpened, instinctive and electric, no longer denied but acknowledged in the shared pulse of revelation. She met his gaze, the blue depths reflecting her own fractured light, and for the first time, she did not flinch from the pull. "Paths," she whispered, her voice threaded with awe and trepidation, the words tasting of ash and starlight. "From here, tunnels that lead beyond the borders to a temple under the northern spire, safe from the hunters, and your council. I saw their faces, the ones who lit the den, betrayal born of envy, a rival alpha's gold in their pockets." The pendant cooled slowly, its flame dimming as the vision ebbed. But the knowledge lingered, etched into her soul like the sigil on Elias's throat. She had always felt the wild's whispers, the subtle guidance that kept her alive in exile, but this was more, a map of destinies, woven from blood and moonlight, revealing her as more than survivor. Rowan's breath hitched, realization dawning like the moon cresting a ridge. He released her shoulder but did not retreat, his fingers lingering near the pendant, brushing the chain with a reverence that bordered on worship. "The Pathfinder," he murmured, the title a sacred echo from the old scrolls, tales of Omegas who guided kings through tempests of fate. His tattoo gleamed faintly in the low light, the crescent flame mirroring hers, a lineage lost to time, perhaps, or a sign from the Dusa herself. Guilt warred with wonder in his expression, the king's melancholy deepening as he pieced together the fragments. "You pulled my son from the fire, and now you light the way from the dark. The prophecy spoke of one such as you, an unmarked soul to heal the Ashcliff wound. I thought it myth, a comfort for a failing reign." Empathy bloomed in Brenna's chest, tender and tragic, born of her own scars. She had been cast out for lacking such gifts, deemed worthless by a pack blind to the Dusa's subtle graces. Yet here, in this hidden refuge, her hidden light manifested, not as reward, but as trial, binding her to a destiny that could shatter her fragile freedom. The pups nuzzled closer, Elias's warmth a reminder of the cost, lives saved, but chains forged in their wake. Rowan knelt before her, not in command but in quiet supplication, his hand covering hers over the pendant. The touch ignited sparks along her skin, resisted no longer, a connection forged in fire's forge. Redemption's first ember, flickering against the guilt that shadowed them both. Outside, the wind howled through the crevice, carrying uivos that grew bolder, a reminder of the pursuing storm. But within, the revelation hung like moonlight on snow, illuminating the path ahead. Brenna felt the weight of it, the gift's double edge. To guide was to choose, to heal was to risk her own rebirth. Rowan's eyes held hers, a silent vow forming in the silence. What was destiny, if not the courage to follow the flame through the unknown? The cavern trembled faintly once more, as if the earth itself acknowledged the shift. Blood and moonlight converging in the heart of the exile. The northern tunnels twisted like veins of forgotten oaths, their quartz-laced walls pulsing with an inner light that mirrored the pendant's subdued glow against Brenna's chest. She led the way now, her pathfinder sight a fragile beacon, unveiling paths shrouded from all but the Deusa's chosen. The air grew colder, laced with the sharp bite of glacial drafts and the distant roar of subterranean winds, carrying echoes of the world above. Uivos that clawed at the stone like vengeful spirits. Elias trotted at her heels, the other pups bundled in Rowan's arms, their warmth a tether amid the encroaching chill. Her gift hummed in her blood, mapping the labyrinth with visions of ice-veined chambers and hidden ascents. But each revelation came at a cost. Flashes of pain, not her own, but the collective scars of a realm fractured by ambition. Rowan's presence at her back was a steady pressure, his limping steps muffled by the snow-dusted floors, yet his scent, pine, iron, and the faint char of old fires, wove through her senses, stirring that resisted pull into something sharper, more insistent. He had not spoken since the cavern's awakening, his silence heavy with the king's melancholy, guilt etching deeper lines into his face as the tattoo on his collarbone peeked through his torn shirt, a faded echo of her pendant's flame. She felt his gaze on her, not commanding but questioning, as if weighing the prophecy against the fragile trust they had forged. Love or freedom? The dilemma coiled in her gut like the tunnels themselves, a choice between the exile's solitude and the redemptive fire of his shadowed world. The path inclined sharply, emerging through a jagged fissure into a moonlit hollow ringed by towering spires of ice and stone. The border sanctum, a neutral ground where packs once parleyed under the Deusa's truce. Snow fell in languid veils, silvering the ground like tears frozen mid-fall, and the wind whispered through the pines, carrying the acrid tang of torches and the musk of gathered wolves. They were not alone. Figures emerged from the tree line, shadows coalescing into forms, betas from Rowan's own Silverfang pack, their eyes gleaming with wary recognition, flanked by armored enforcers bearing the rival crest, a snarling wolf in crimson enamel. At their center stood the traitor, Counselor Thorn, his lean frame cloaked in furs, stained with the den's ash, a smirk twisting his scarred muzzle. Beside him loomed Alpha Kale of the Ironclaw, broad and brutal, his furred pelt rippling over muscles honed for war, eyes burning with the greed that had ignited the flames. Rowan's growl rumbled low, a thunder trapped in his chest as he set the pups down gently behind a snowdrift. Elias whimpered, pressing against Brenna's leg, his sigil catching the moonlight like a blade's edge. She knelt to shield him, her hand instinctively clutching the pendant, its flame warming as if sensing the confrontation's heat. The past crashed upon them like an avalanche, Thorn's betrayal, revealed in her vision, now flesh and fury before her. He had been Rowan's advisor, sworn brother in the lunar rites, yet envy had poisoned his oaths, allying with Kale to torch the nursery and claim the throne through Elias's ashes. "You flee like a whipped cur, Ashcliff," Thorn sneered, his voice slicing through the wind, laced with the false piety of one who twisted the Deuce's will. The council has spoken. Your weakness invites ruin. The heir's death was mercy. Better a strong pack under Ironclaw than your guilt-ridden reign. Kale stepped forward, his presence a wall of dominance, the air thickening with alpha pheromones that pressed against Brenna's senses like a storm front. His gaze raked over her, dismissing the unmarked Omega as chaff, then fixed on Rowan with predatory glee. Surrender the boy, and perhaps I'll spare your wanderer whore. The flames were but a warning. War comes regardless. Brenna's blood surged, hot and defiant, her gift flaring in response. A vision splintering the night. Kale's hidden lair, maps stained with blood plotting the Silverfang's fall. Thorn's hand striking the torch to the den's oiled timbers. The pup's cries echoed in her mind, mingling with her own rejection's echo, the pack that had cast her out for her thin blood, blind to the strength blooming now. She rose, stepping between Rowan and the encroaching line, the pendant blazing against her skin, its light casting crimson flickers on the snow. "Mercy?" she echoed, her voice steady, threaded with the poetic cadence of her awakening. "You speak of it while pups burn? The Deuce sees your treason, Thorn. Your greed lit the fire that nearly claimed the air." Thorn's laugh was a bark, but uncertainty flickered in his eyes as the betas shifted, whispers rippling through their ranks. Rowan's hand brushed her arm, a touch of restraint and reliance, his breath warm against the cold. "Stand down," he commanded, voice gravel rough with suppressed rage, yet laced with the ethical core that defined him. The king who waged wars for peace, now haunted by the lives his duties had endangered. But Kale lunged, claws extended, forcing Rowan into motion. The hollow erupted. Snow churned to bloody slush under flashing fangs and fists, weavos shattering the night as Silverfang loyalists clashed with Ironclaw enforcers. Brenna scooped Elias and the others, retreating to the spire's shadow, her heart pounding a war drum. The pendant's heat a shield against the chaos. Rowan fought like a tempest, his wounds reopening in sprays of red that steamed on the frost, but guilt slowed him. Each strike a hesitation, as if striking Thorn meant admitting his own failures in judgment. The traitor circled, dagger glinting, and drove it toward the king's flank. Brenna's vision pierced the fray, a fork in fate, clear as moonlight on blood. Intervene and bind herself to Rowan's war, her freedom traded for love's redemptive forge, or flee with the pups, forgiving nothing, leaving the realm to its cycles of vengeance. What was strength, if not choosing mercy over the blade's easy justice? Her body moved, gift guiding her through the melee, the pendant flaring as she hurled a loose stone at Thorn's hand, shattering his aim. Rowan countered, pinning the traitor with a roar that shook the spires, but held the killing blow, eyes locking on Brenna's in silent query. Kale's forces faltered, the tide turning as loyalists rallied, but the rival Alpha retreated into the storm, howling promises of retribution. Thorn knelt in the snow, bloodied and broken, his gaze pleading now. Not for life, but understanding. "I did it for the pack," he gasped, voice cracking like thin ice. "Your guilt weakens us all." Rowan's fist trembled, the moral precipice yawning. Forgiveness, a risk that could heal or invite further betrayal. War, a path to vengeance that would consume the innocents Brenna had saved. She stepped closer, the pups trembling against her, and placed a hand on his arm. The contact electric, pulling the resisted bond into full bloom, love as proof, not prize, demanding she choose union over isolation. In the wind's mournful howl, under the moon's unblinking eye, Brenna whispered, "Mercy crowns the fallen, but only if it spares the flame." The dilemma hung, ethical and spiritual, blood pooling like ink on snow. Forgive and risk all. War, and lose the rebirth they both craved. Rowan's eyes met hers, the choice shared, the night holding its breath as the fire within her pendant dimmed, waiting for dawn's verdict. The snow in the border sanctum swirled like the breaths of restless ancestors, veiling the bloodied ground in a shroud of fragile white. Brenna stood amid the fray's aftermath, her hand still warm on Rowan's arm. The pendant at her throat a quiet ember against the chill that clawed at her skin. Thorn knelt before them, his form broken and bowed, the traitor's smirk long shattered into a mask of desperation, his blood staining the frost in dark spreading petals. The rival forces had scattered into the storm, Kyle's howls fading like echoes of a defeated thunder. But the true battle lingered here, in the trembling space between Mercy and the blade, where Rowan's fist hovered, knuckles white with the weight of what might come. Elias whined softly at her feet, the other pups pressing close, their tiny bodies a living reminder of the flames she had defied. The moon hung heavy above the spires, its silver light pooling on the air's sigil, illuminating the path her gift had unveiled. Not just tunnels and sanctuaries, but the deeper veins of fate, where sacrifice could mend what war would only rend. Brenna's heart thundered, a visceral rhythm that echoed the wind's mournful sigh, pulling at the resisted bond that now bloomed unchecked, love as redemption's forge, demanding she surrender her exile's solitude for the uncertain union of souls scarred by the same fire. Rowan's gaze locked on hers, storm-sea eyes turbulent with the king's ethical torment, guilt etching shadows deeper than the night. He had built his reign on oaths to the Deusa, vowing protection for the weak, yet his blindness had invited this pyre, endangering the very blood he swore to shield. "Speak your judgment, Pathfinder," he murmured, voice rough as gravel under boot, the words a confession that stripped him bare. The tattoo on his collarbone gleamed faintly, its crescent flame a twin to her pendant, binding their wounds in silent testimony. Around them, the loyal betas circled warily, their breaths clouding the air. Weavos distant now, but a reminder that the realm watched, poised on the edge of fracture or renewal. Thorn lifted his head, eyes pleading, the scent of his fear mingling with the coppery tang of spilled blood. "Rowan, brother in the moon's light, I acted for strength, not spite. Your hesitations, the endless pieces, the mercy for rogues like her, invite ruin. Kill me, and prove the Ironclaw right, a weak king clings to ghosts." His words slithered like smoke, probing the fractures in Rowan's resolve. But Brenna saw through them, her gift whispering truths unveiled. Thorn's envy rooted in his own unmarked youth, a beta forever shadowed, twisting duty into dagger. The wind howled through the spires, carrying flakes that stung like accusations, and Brenna felt the pull sharpen, instinctive, profound, a tether forged in the den's inferno. She had been rejected for her thin blood, cast into the wilds as worthless, yet here she stood, the Deusa's compass, guiding not just paths, but hearts toward rebirth. Freedom whispered retreat, take the pups, vanish into the northern wilds where her gift could wander unbound. But love, that tragic bloom amid the pain, urged union, sacrifice her isolation to heal the king's guilt, to crown mercy over vengeance, proving strength in compassion's quiet fire. She stepped forward, the snow crunching like brittle oaths beneath her feet, and knelt before Thorn, her blistered hands steady despite the tremor in her soul. The pendant warmed, its flame cradling the moon's curve, casting a soft glow that bathed the traitor's face. "The Deusa does not demand blood for blood," she said, her voice a poetic thread woven through the cold, intimate and unyielding. "You lit the den to sever a line, but in doing so, you ignited a greater light. Rise, Thorn, not as traitor, but as one redeemed by choice. Swear again to the moon, and let this night be your trial's end." Rowan's breath caught, a ragged sound like wind through pines, his fist unclenching as understanding dawned. Guilt warred in his eyes, the melancholy king tempted by the blade's simplicity, yet her words echoed the prophecy's core. An Omega's grace to mend the Ashcliff wound, not through war's roar, but healing's hush. He extended a hand to Thorn. pulling him up with a grip that bruised but did not break, the act a seismic shift, forgiveness as sacrifice, trading vengeance for the realm's fragile peace. The betas murmured, a ripple of awe and doubt, but the moon bore witness, its light silvering the scene like a benediction. Thorn staggered to his feet, tears carving paths through the grime on his cheeks, his oath spilling forth in a broken whisper, "By flame and blood, I reclaim my place." He bowed low, not to power, but to the mercy that had spared him, and retreated into the shadows with the loyalists, the air lightening as if the storm itself exhaled. In the quiet that followed, Rowan turned to Brenna, the pups nuzzling between them, Elias's warmth bridging the space. He cupped her face, thumb tracing the soot-streaked line of her jaw, the touch electric, tender amid the tragedy. "You chose us," he said, voice laced with wonder and sorrow, the bond sealing in that visceral moment, love as proof, resisted no more, a union born of shared rebirth. Her freedom yielded to this, not as loss but as destiny's revelation, the pendant's flame steady now, mirroring the one kindled in his eyes. They ascended from the hollow together, the northern paths opening under her gift's guidance, leading to the ice-veined castle where thrones awaited not as burdens, but as hearths renewed. The wind softened, carrying the scent of pine and distant blooms breaking through snow, a sensory promise of spring's defiant return. Brenna felt the weight lift, rejection transmuted into purpose, her blood no longer thin but royal in its compassion. Rowan drew her close, their steps synchronized in the moon's glow, the pups trailing like stars in their wake. What was Renascimento, if not the flame rising from ashes, mercy's crown forged in the heart's unyielding choice? Blood and moonlight converged at last, weaving exile into eternity, the Deus's whisper a lullaby on the breeze. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive. The ascent to the ice-veined castle wound through veils of mist and moonlight, the northern paths unfurling like the Deus's own scroll under Brenna's guiding sight. Each step echoed the rhythm of rebirth, snow yielding softly beneath her feet, no longer the treacherous drifts of exile, but a carpet woven from forgiveness's fragile threads. Elias scampered ahead, the other pups tumbling in playful bounds, their yips a counterpoint to the wind's hushed lullaby, carrying scents of pine resin and thawing earth, promises of spring defiant against winter's grasp. The pendant at her throat rested cool now, its crescent moon cradling the flame in quiet harmony, mirroring the tattoo on Rowan's skin. A symbol etched not just in metal and ink, but in the blood they had spilled and spared. Rowan's hand enveloped hers, calloused fingers interlacing with her scarred ones, the touch a visceral anchor amid the shifting world. His limp had eased in the sanctuary's glow, but the king's melancholy lingered in the set of his shoulders, guilt a shadow that trailed him like the moon's elongated reflection on snow. He had chosen mercy over the blade, pulling Thorn from the precipice as Brenna had pulled Elias from the pyre, yet the weight of near loss pressed upon him, the heir's sigil a constant reminder of failures that could have ended a lineage. "This path you light," he murmured, voice low and resonant, threading through the crisp air like smoke from a distant hearth. "It leads not just to stone walls, but to what we might become. Are you certain, Pathfinder? Your gift could wander free, unbound by crowns or councils." Brenna paused at a ridge's crest, the castle emerging below like a titan forged from frost and forgotten stars, towers spiraling skyward, their surfaces etched with lunar runes that caught the moon's silver kiss, glowing faintly against the encroaching dawn. The air hummed with ancient power, the scent of glacial ice mingling with the faint, metallic tang of forges, long stilled, waiting for renewal. Her heart clenched, a tender ache born of the exile's echo, the pack that had rejected her for unseen worth, deeming her blood too thin to matter. Yet here, in this union's forge, she felt the pull resolve, not as conquest, but as proof, love demanding sacrifice of the solitude she had clung to like a cloak against the cold. Freedom had been her shield, but compassion's fire warmed deeper, healing the fractures in both their souls. "I chose you in the hollow," she replied, her voice intimate, poetic in its quiet strength, eyes meeting his storm-sea gaze where wonder warred with sorrow. "Not for throne or title, but because the Deusa wove our wounds together, the fire that scarred me, the guilt that chains you. Elias lives because mercy pulled him free, as it spared Thorn. To turn back now would dim the flame we kindled." The pendant warmed under her words, a subtle pulse sinking with her breath, the flame within flickering as if alive, witnessing the Renacimento unfolding. She traced its curve, feeling the metal's history. Her mother's heirloom, passed through generations of unmarked omegas, now revealed as the Deusa's compass, guiding not just paths, but hearts toward redemption. They descended into the castle's embrace, the great gates groaning open under Rowan's subtle command, loyal sentinels bowing low with eyes wide at the sight of the heir scampering through. The halls unfolded in a symphony of blue deep shadows and golden torchlight, walls veined with quartz that echoed the tunnel's glow, air thick with the aroma of beeswax and aged stone. Whispers rippled through the corridors, tales of the fire, the traitor's fall, the Omega who had walked through storm, but Brenna felt no triumph, only the visceral weight of choice. In the throne chamber, a vast dome open to the stars, Rowan faced his council, Thorn among them, humbled and scarred, his oath renewed under the moon's unblinking eye. The air crackled with tension, the scent of blood from the fray still clinging to furs and armor, but Rowan's voice cut through like a blade sheathed in velvet. "No more wars born of envy," he declared, Elias cradled in one arm, the Pups' sigil gleaming like a crown of light. "The Ironclaw's threat lingers, but we meet it with unity, not vengeance. The Pathfinder stands with us, not as servant, but as equal, her gift, the Deusa's proof that strength blooms in mercy's soil." His free hand sought Brenna's, drawing her to his side before the assembled, the bond sealing in that public gaze. Alpha and Omega, king and exile, united in the tragic romance of shared rebirth. Gasps echoed, but nods followed. The realm shifting like snow under thaw, rejection transmuted into reverence. Yet the sacrifice came in the quiet hours after, when the council dispersed and the castle slept under dawn's first blush. In a chamber high in the eastern tower, overlooking peaks dusted with crimson light, Rowan unbound his wounds fully, the gashes across his ribs stark against his skin. Brenna knelt beside him, her hands, once blistered from the den, now tracing salves scented with lunar herbs, the pendant dangling like a talisman between them. Pain lanced through her touch, not his but hers, the freedom forsaken, the wild's call silenced for this hearth of duty and desire. He pulled her close, forehead to hers, breaths mingling in the room's hush, the tattoo on his collarbone brushing her flame-embraced moon. "You heal more than flesh," he whispered, voice breaking like ice under sun, guilt yielding to gratitude's warmth. "My reign was shadowed, a king marked by loss, but you. You pulled light from the burning den, not just my son, but me." Tears traced her cheeks, hot against the cool air. The emotional texture raw, winds whisper through arrow slits, the distant weevo of sentinels, the steady beat of hearts entwined. Love was no reward, but proof. Her choice to stay, to cure his melancholy with her own scarred grace, forging union from the pyre's remnants. Outside, the sun crested, gilding the snow in gold, the flame in her pendant steady and bright. Brenna leaned into him, the pups curling at their feet, Elias's warmth a bridge to the future. Rebirth was this, sacrifice yielding to serenity, compassion crowning the fallen, blood and moonlight woven into eternity's tapestry. The Diusa smiled through the light, her whisper a breeze on their skin. Every omega born to heal a king's wound. Every choice a step toward the stars. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe, because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.